Heyo! Welcome to Painted Plastic People. My name is Charles, and I help aspiring and beginner miniature painters learn to save time and money by teaching them to paint fast and effective. Today is part 2 of our series of how to paint a miniature. We're taking a deep dive in priming. If you missed the overview of the whole process of painting a miniature, there's a link up in the top hand corner here, as well as a link down in the description below. And you should really give that video a look. So today I'll be talking about the 3 main colors you can prime with. I'll be talking about the 3 main methods you can prime with. And at the very end of the video, I'm going to be giving you a tip and a trick. So there's 3 main colors you can prime with: white, black, and gray. And I'm going to give you an overview of each one. The first color is white. And white helps give your miniatures a little more pop. When you put your paint on white, it makes your paint actually brighten up a bit. This is very good if you're going for a sort of colorful paint scheme, or if you're painting in a setting that's quite bright and vibrant. Think something like Power Rangers or some sort of family-friendly type of games. The downside with white is that it's very easy to see mistakes on it. So once you've kind of given your base coat and maybe put a wash on, you'll suddenly notice a glaring white stain coming right back at you. It's just terrible. But this, I think, is also an advantage in a weird way, because this makes you, as a beginner painter, sort of go over the miniature in detail, so that way you know you're getting every single bit covered with paint. I think this is a good practice to get you into that habit for future painting, and it just builds that good habit. The next color is black. Now, black is very good for if you're going for a dark, grim sort of look. Think something like Dark Souls, Darkest Dungeon, something along those lines. The also good advantage of that is that it's very good to hide mistakes with black. You can kind of pass things off as, oh, I missed a spot, but it's actually a shadow. So it can hide mistakes more easily. So I don't recommend it if you're just starting out, because you may rely on that too much. So I would say hold back on that. But another disadvantage to black is that colors such as red, yellow, or orange have a hard time going onto it. The best thing you can do in this case is to just paint that spot white, and then once that's dried, go over with the color proper. But if you're not using those colors mainly in your miniature or in your army or what have you, then you don't really have to worry about that. The last, but certainly not least color, is gray. Gray is a good middle tone. Of course, it doesn't make your colors pop, but it doesn't darken them. So it's good if you're looking for like a natural look like you would have in like a real world setting, some sort of urban type you might want to go for here. The advantages and disadvantages to gray are basically one and the same, in that there's no real advantage or disadvantage to gray. It doesn't really pop your miniatures, but it doesn't darken them. It doesn't really hide your mistakes, but it doesn't really point them out either. So gray is a good middle tone. The important thing to remember with these 3 colors, and I don't want to give you an overload here, is that maybe before you even prime is to consider what primer you're going to use, depending on what kind of a setting or color scheme you're going for. So if you want something bright and colorful, like I mentioned Power Rangers, you may want to go with white. But if you're going for something more like a horror thing, sort of like Mansions of Madness or some sort of dark fantasy game, you may want to go with black. But if you're looking for something a little more neutral, more realistic, you may want to go with gray. So that's just something to consider. Don't get too wrapped up in that though. You can pick whatever primer you want, and you can just kind of get any look you want as well. It's something to keep in mind before you even prime your miniature. I just wanted to say real quick, if you're getting any value out of this video, it's helping me out. If you'd leave a like down below, I'd really appreciate that. I'd appreciate you too. So there's 3 main methods to prime with. The first is to paint on primer. The second is airbrush. And the third is with Rattle Can. The good things about a paint on primer is that, unlike a Rattle Can, you don't have to deal with any dangerous fumes, and you can prime inside, of course. The also good thing over an airbrush is that it's much less expensive, and it's just what you're doing anyway, so there's no real learning to this. It's just putting on primer to mini, just like you would put paint to mini. Easy peasy. So this way, it's kind of good practice to get you in that mode of base coating. So I would suggest this is a good way for miniature painters that are just starting out to go. The downside to this is, for myself personally, is that it's hard to get a hold of. There's no local stores in my area where I can just go in and pick up some of this. And when I try to go online to find some, it's spotty at best to find them. And on top of just paying what I'm paying for the paint on primer, is I'm also paying shipping fees. So that can add up on top of it. So the price may end up equaling out the same as it would be for a Rattle Can, or it may end up being even more. So prices range from about $5 for Tamiya's paint on primer. This is for about 20 milliliters of primer, to anywhere from $16 to $25 for Vallejo paint on primer. Though the good thing with Vallejo paint on primer is that in the description they say that you can use it as both a paint on primer and as airbrush primer. So you do have that versatility if you get in the habit of buying that. The next method is with an airbrush. Now, the quick caveat to this is that you don't use an airbrush just to prime. You also use it for base coats and all sorts of miniature painting techniques. But we will discuss that later on in later videos. Big positive with an airbrush is that you can just prime on and get a very nice thin coat of primer on your miniature, and you don't have to deal with fumes and such like you do with a Rattle Can. So you do have that advantage going for you. You can also do some different techniques right out of the priming phase that I will discuss later on in this video. The big disadvantage to an airbrush is the price point. I've seen airbrushes go for about $140 for a very low-end airbrush and compressor combination. This is a big turn-off point for myself. And for beginner miniature painters, I would suggest not worrying about getting an airbrush until you're much more developed in skill and you feel like you've kind of hit a ceiling with your skills and you kind of want to up the ante and you have that kind of money to invest into your hobby. At the moment, I don't want you spending that kind of money on a big thing like an airbrush and a compressor. I would rather you went to a cheaper method like the paint on primer or the Rattle Can, as I'm about to discuss. With a Rattle Can, there's all sorts of advantages. The first being that they're readily available. You can go down to your local hardware store or even your Walmart, where I go to get mine, and you can just pick them up off the shelf. They're about $8 Canadian. You can also prime a lot of miniatures in one go, which you can't really do with an airbrush or paint on primer. This is a good way to speed you up. You might be able to get a bunch of miniatures primed in one go. The big disadvantage is what I talked about in my overview of all the steps, is that you need to prime outside. You really shouldn't prime indoors unless it's extremely well ventilated, but even still, using a face mask and gloves, that way you're not breathing in any fumes or getting any primer on you. This is the best way to go about this in my opinion, and the safest way. So to wrap up, the paint on primer doesn't have as many fumes to deal with, it's cheaper than an airbrush, and you can get good practice out of it. The downside is, in my particular case, and your situation may be different, is that it's hard to get a hold of. For an airbrush, it's very convenient to get these nice thin layers, and you can do more than just prime with an airbrush, obviously. But the downside is the price point, maintaining it, and learning how to use it. With a Rattle Can, they're cheaper, they're more readily available, and you can do a wide variety of techniques with them that you can't do with the other types of priming, as well as you can prime a lot of miniatures in one sit down rather than priming one at a time like you usually do with the others. The big downside, of course, being the fumes and needing to prime outside. So lastly for you are my tips and tricks. The first one is about priming a mass amount of miniatures. So what I mean is, if you're going to prime a clan from a board game, or a squad for a war game, or an entire army, and you know that the main color is going to be, let's say, red or blue or green, or any other color for that matter, what you can do is get a primer color that matches up with the color you're going for. In this example, I'm using the Moon Clan from Rising Sun's Dynasty Invasion expansion. These guys are a dark blue color, Now, what I'm doing is taking a dark blue spray can and giving them a coat of dark blue completely over rather than black, white, or gray. What this has done is effectively base coated most of them as well as primed them in one step, saving me some time. You can do this with all sorts of different colors. Don't think that just red, blue, or green is out there. You make primer in colors for all sorts, in all sorts of different ways, from airbrush primer, paint-on primer, and even rattle cans. What's really cool about paint-on primer especially is that you could potentially prime and do a base coat all in one go. Though the primer is not really meant to be like that, you could effectively save some time. The last trick I have for you is zenithal priming. So what this does is try to imitate the sun as if it were at its zenith or at its highest point, reflected in your miniature's priming. So what you're going to do here is prime your miniature in black and get everywhere you can with them. The next thing you're going to do is take your gray primer and spray your miniature 45 degrees on, or as best you can match, 360 degrees around your miniature. Now you're not going to cover it completely. There is going to be some black left exposed, and this is the point of this. The last thing you're going to do is take your white primer and you're going to prime your miniature from straight down from above. You're not going to try and cover everything again like you did with the black primer, and you're going to just cover that straight on top. What you've done here is created a transition from light to mid-tone to dark. So now when you apply your paint in a thin coat, your highlights will show through, because when you put your paint on, like I was talking about when we talked about colors, when it hits white, it'll be at its brightest. When it hits the gray, it'll be kind of a mid-tone, and when it goes down to black, it'll be dark. So if you're priming in one particular color, let's say you're priming armor for a character, it'll actually create a natural transition across the character, creating natural highlights. So this can be effective if you're using a bunch of sort of random foot soldiers for a board game, think like a ton of zombies or something. And you can get natural highlights out of them right out of the priming stage, saving you a ton of time, so that way you can focus on the more detailed characters like the heroes or the bosses. Hey, I just wanted to give you a quick reminder that this is just one of a larger playlist of videos that I've been making. The first was the overview. This has been the first step of priming, and next week we're going into base coating. So you don't want to miss that, so you should probably hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button so you don't miss out. You can hit the like button if you really like this video. I appreciate it. You can share this with your friends, with your family, with your enemies. You might make a new friend that way. And if you want, you can leave a comment down below, or maybe I wasn't detailed enough or what have you, or you just want to talk. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you have. And remember, get it to the table. Have a good day.